Before Rabbi Martyr and I facilitate some important conversations between you and your children this morning, we also want to update you on a little bit of a change of policy that will begin the end of November. And I know it seems odd with what is going on in our country right now, and spikes and going on even in our state. We have a task force, as we mentioned our last session, that was really tasked with how to safely do in-person gatherings. And so they have really dug deep since the end of August with this task of trying to figure out how to do in-person gatherings. We tried this on a very small level throughout the holidays with different in-person outdoor experiences. We tried it with the Tashlich service. We tried it with the shofar service. We tried it with Hallel and Hoshano for Sukkot, with a socially distanced Hakafot on Simchat Torah. And those were all successful. We also understand the reality that it's getting colder. If any of you left your house early this morning, this weather early this morning is not necessarily weather where you want large groups of people hanging out outside. And so what we really tasked this committee, this task force with, made up of medical professionals, made up of risk management professionals, of how we can safely gather indoors, because we know that that is our reality unless we shut down entirely and go to totally virtual again. To safely gather indoors. For those of you who have children who are younger that are in our JLC, you know that our JLC has been meeting. We have some of our JLC students right now in our building, and they've been meeting socially distanced and safely. Our preschool has been doing so since the beginning of September. And those of you who have students at Goldak Academy, that has been going on, or other day schools in the area, Gottesman, that has been going on safely as well. And so we're thinking based on those standards, how we can do that safely. And what our task force has approved, and this is why I want to share with you, because this may impact what you decide. What our task force has approved beginning the end of November is allowing in the combination space of our sanctuary and our Stein Family Lounge, which is that back extra area behind our sanctuary. Right now, 14 households, 14 family units spread out. A household can be a single person. A household could be the Zarels, who are a family of 6. And it's not about necessarily the numbers, although we do max out on numbers and people, and that max possibility of people is 60 people right now. But this proposal that was accepted by our Board of Trustees allows for 14 households in that space. For a Shabbat morning service, we want to be able to provide opportunities for engagement with B'nai Mitzvah families and your guests and your extended family, as well as our congregants as well. So the current policy allows for that number to be split, for you to be able to invite 7 additional families, 7 additional households, not counting your own family, not counting your own households. And those families would be spread out throughout the sanctuary. When Rabbi Martyr and I talk you through this process, we'll talk to you about how honors would work. Some of that means that some people with honors, aliyot, for example, would not be coming up onto the bima. They would be saying the aliyah blessings from their place, that sort of thing. But this certainly allows for that and would allow for them all to be in the space together. That's part one. If you have any questions about that, we can talk that through, and you can ask me that afterwards. All the regular health and wellness rules still apply. If somebody is coming from out of state, from a state on the New Jersey quarantine list, they would not be permitted to join us unless they quarantine for the appropriate period of time. Everybody would be filling out a health and wellness form within 24 hours of arriving. So on Friday afternoon before Shabbat would begin. and everybody would have their temperatures taken at the door. What would be happening on Shabbat morning in our sanctuary, which is our intention, is to limit the amount of time in the sanctuary, because the recommendation is only 90 minutes. So what we would actually do is still do a totally virtual Pesukei de Zimra and Shacharit service. So that would be a virtual Zoom-like service on Shabbat morning from 9:30 to 10:30. And then at 10:30, we would gather those who from our congregation who sign up, and those who are your guests who sign up for an in-person Torah service, Devar Torah, Musaf experience. That would be about an hour and a half total. And again, that's about limiting the amount of time that we are indoors and in the same space together. Again, if you have any questions about that, can ask, but yes, Kathy.
What if we've already switched our date to like a Monday?
Meaning, can you switch back?
No, meaning can we do this on a Monday?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We could still, right, figure that out. This is not specific to a Shabbat morning, at least right now. We are offering many opportunities. If you are doing a weekday or a Sunday morning or a Shabbat afternoon Mincha Mariv Havdalah experience, we're trying to accommodate the needs of as many people as possible. We say that with the understanding that this is what our Board of Trustees approved now. And I hate to say this, but I think this is also the world that we are living in, that who knows if this will still be the policy a month from now, 6 weeks from now. And that's really, I think, what is so hard about trying to plan and prepare during this process.
And just one follow-up, is there an opportunity after that for a gathering of eating and stuff? Or
Right.
no?
I know we talked about that. Unfortunately, that is still not taking place in our building. Because everything that would take place in our building is still everybody masked when they are in gatherings together. Anything that includes eating, because that includes, by definition, removing your mask, that would not be taking place in our building.
Rabbi, do you see like every month just updating us when we're either meeting here or by email, so that those who are farther away, we can,
that's right. That's our plan, right? For those who have B'nai Mitzvah in the spring or fall of 2021, who knows, the world could be totally different. Certainly for those who are early 2021, I imagine that this policy is more reflective of what the world may look like in just a couple of months from now. But couple months after that, when there's a vaccine available, depending on what the governors, right? A lot of this is also dependent on what the governor is allowing. That's when we shut down in March, the governor had shut down all of the houses of worship and any group gatherings. And that was one of the things that influenced our own congregation's building shutting down. So each time we meet, and even when we're done meeting, we will, of course, update going forward. And again, if any of you have any specific, unique questions, feel free afterwards to reach out to me or Rabbi Martyr directly. With that in mind, I want us to start off by studying some text together. What we want to talk about with you and your child today is really the idea of responsibility, responsibility for themselves, responsibility for their family, responsibility for their friends and community, and responsibility for this world, and how that all plays out. Because in some ways it's hard to take responsibility for yourself when you're not used to that. It may be easy to take responsibility for your friends and family, for those that you care about, for those that you love. It's much harder to take responsibility for this world. It's much harder to take responsibility for those that you don't know. And I'm not just talking about those on the other side of the world that we define as most vulnerable. I'm talking about those who are miles away from us, those who we don't have a relationship with, that live in our neighborhoods, that we also need to take responsibility for, that we're not necessarily realize or used to, that is also part of our responsibility. So I'm going to try to share my screen now. Let me know if this doesn't work. And Rabbi Martyr is going to take us through a couple texts, which hopefully will lead us in conversation about really what does it mean to take responsibility for the world.
Okay, thanks, Rabbi O. And as Rabbi O pulls that up,
we'll say the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yishanu mitzvah v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who gives us the mitzvah of busying ourselves with Torah.
All right. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great.
Okay. Do you want to make me a co-host so I can?
Certainly can.
Okay. Thanks. So let's take a look at this first text. These both come from Pirkei Avot, which we traditionally translate as the ethics of our fathers, or I would say our ancestors. And they are words of wisdom that have been handed down to us. They make up Mishnah. There is no Talmud commentary on Pirkei Avot, or Mishnah Avot is the alternative name. So we really just have this text. And the Mishnah is, codified around 200 CE. So it's certainly ancient, but it's amazing how these words, of course, continue to speak to us today. So as a way of talking about responsibility, but also I would say the values that we really hold dear in each of our families, in our world, in our community, let's jump into this first one. The text is a quotation from a sage called Shimon HaTzadik, or Simeon the Righteous. So Shimon HaTzadik haya misharei Knesset Hagdolah. He was the head of the Great Assembly. Hu haya omer. He used to say, so when it says hu haya, just everyone knows, haya means it's something he would say regularly. He didn't say it once, it was sort of habitual. This is what he would teach. This was a great saying of his. And you've maybe heard this before. Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed, al ha'torah, ve'al ha'avodah, ve'al gimilut chasadim. That on three things, or we translate them here as pillars, but devarim can be words or things, matters of importance here, does the world stand, omed. And as in, it gives it balance, it gives it harmony. What does our world depend on? Torah, which we might understand as learning, although we can certainly expand any of these definitions. So I want to hear from you in a moment how we're going to break apart each of these and how you would translate them. So Torah, avodah, which also has a few meanings. Avodah can either mean worship, prayer here, also refers to service in the ancient temple that the rabbis are considering, sacrifice. And in modern Hebrew, anyone know avodah? Feel free to unmute yourself. What does avodah mean? Work, labor, toil, exactly, busying ourselves with physical labor or our jobs. And lastly, gimilut chasadim, or acts of kindness, acts of loving kindness. So these are the three principles, according to Shimon HaTzadik, that without which our world feels unstable, that we feel unstable, and they really keep us keep our society in line. And now I want to turn it over to you, and maybe we'll stop screen share just for a moment to try to define these three terms. And I'm curious if you agree. If you think that these are three principles that, yes, make sense. He's talking about the world in general. We are, of course, also speaking in a Jewish context. So I think we can look at it from different angles, also in our own home lives. And just to add one more piece before I turn it over to you, the great medieval commentator on the Mishnah, Bartanura, teaches that what does it mean that the world stands on three pillars? He reads that as, this is why the world was even created. The world was created so that these three values or concepts could come into the world. That's how important and beautiful and sacred they are. It's so that we could engage in Torah study, so that we could pray, or maybe we'd say labor, and of course, do acts of loving kindness. That's why the world is even here. That's why we're here, is to do those three things. So let's start with Torah. How would you begin to define Torah when you see that, the world stands on Torah?
Feel free to unmute, or you could write your comments in the chat function if that's easier.
Yeah, you can type also, that's fine. I know it's hard to have normal conversations on Zoom, but feel free to jump in, or you can raise your hand if that's also more comfortable. What is Torah? How do you understand Torah?
I think of Torah as the framework and the foundation that everything is built on. It sort of gives us some guidance, some inspiration. and then we take it from there.
So a framework of inspiration, of ethics, of values, law. Yes, Joey says law, right? That's certainly a part of it. So laws to guide us in our living. I see the LeBeaus. Maybe you're unmuting. Codes and reminders. Codes and reminders. Yes. Can you say, Taffy, more about reminders? I love that.
Just the idea that the way it works is that you're constantly engaged in it. So times in my life where I'm not engaged in any kind of congregation, it goes away. And times where, my kids are in school and, and I go to shul regularly, it's there. So it's like, I guess that's the living part of it. I don't know.
And similar maybe to Marcy, what you said about it being sort of this foundation. So it's there to access whenever you come to it. Our story, ethics to live by, beautiful, all true, and all sustaining. I would say it's also what gives us a framework for asking questions, for asking the big questions of life, and for engaging in those struggles. Any others? Boyarskis.
Yes. So there's a lot of references in the Torah to the paths and the ways of the path, and I think that there's a look back, I think historically, on where we've come and a sense of a pathway that guides us that we need to interpret and understand and apply to our everyday lives and to our current situation, the modern world.
Mm-hmm. So always sort of relevant in whatever situation we're in to apply, like a house or maybe like a trampoline. I love that. It's a jumping off point for is that what you meant, Marcy? In terms of discussion and questions. And it's the framework. I love that, Dory. Let's look at avodah, service or worship, or whether we're thinking of the ancient temple for the rabbis and sacrifices, or prayer. How is that, how can we understand avodah? And also for us today, what does avodah mean to you? And by the way, I should have said this before, these three concepts are also, I would say at Bethel, our framework for B'nai Mitzvah preparation, that the B'nai Mitzvah really stands on those three pillars also, that you're all engaging in Torah study and learning to read words of Torah. We're going to be, working with you on your drashot. You're learning to lead prayer. And you're also going to be engaging in a mitzvah project that some of you already are. So those are also the three concepts that we're taking in terms of Jewish adulthood and what's most important about Jewish life. So mutually exclusive. What do you think, Joey? How do those three, you want to jump to how those three interact? Maybe before we get to that, let's talk about avodah. When you hear prayer, what does that mean? Worship, prayer.
Prayer feels almost, to me, it feels almost internal.
Having your own sort of inner life. I would agree with that. Yes, we have the important concept in Jewish law of finding, those three times during the day of Shacharit, Mincha, and Mariv, the evening service, those three times to pray as a sort of offering to God, regularity. But even more so, I would agree, and especially for modern American Jews, finding that inner life of spirituality, of finding moments to feel grateful, to reflect on your life, to have quiet space for yourself and meditation. All of that, I would say, is also, that's really a part of prayer. And it's not easy to do. It takes cultivating. It's actually hard work. So in that way, the meanings of avodah really come together. It's hard work to pray or to find prayerful, quiet moments, maybe in nature. A hotline from your soul to higher principle. That's awesome. It's a hotline, right? It's a way of communicating what's inside. And yes, we have the words of the prayer book, and those are words that we've received, and we value tradition. And that's why you're all studying the words in the prayer book. But at the same time, your own soul has its own language, its own way to express itself. And maybe that's with words, your own words. Maybe that's through art, creativity, gratitude, the spiritual part of life, the part that is not concrete. Yes. Yes, nice, Victoria. So not necessarily, it's not something I create, but it's something it's part of my experience. It's my values. It's how I reflect. And now lastly, let's talk about Gimilut Chasadim. Gimilut Chasadim. I have to tell my Gimilut Chasadim joke, which is what did the robbers say to the rabbis upon breaking into the Beit Midrash? Now we'll all understand the joke. Gimilut Chasadim. Chasadim are sages. So
that is what we call a rabbi joke.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to actually tell that joke, which I usually don't. But Gimilut Chasadim, chesed, kindness. What is chesed? Many of us have heard that word before, but it's not just, doing something nice for someone else, which is of course a good thing. How would you understand chesed? And Gimilut means sort of doing of that. How is chesed a different kind of kindness? What sets it apart? What's something maybe you've heard about chesed? Or maybe an example of chesed? Going out of your way and adding to the world. Yeah, it's not convenient. It's not like on my way to do something, I do an act of chesed. It's like I have to make special effort and special thought. I do think that's a part of it. We are not alone. It's making sure people know they're not alone. Bartanura, that commentator on the Mishnah, who I mentioned, he says about Gimilut Chasadim that his examples for it, which might sound familiar in the context of chesed, are rejoicing with the bride and groom, comforting mourners, like in a shiva home, visiting the sick, burying the dead. All of those acts are times when we don't want people to be alone, and we don't want to be alone, that we need the love and attention and support of community. Those are acts of chesed, and they're not easy. It's not easy to bury a person in the community. It's not easy to necessarily make the time for going to Shiva, but that's the kind of kindness that is essential. Acting to preserve individual dignity. Yes, right. So that's another kavod we often translate as respect, but also means dignity. And there's little that's more important than helping each person feel the dignity of as a human being. So burial, for example, everybody gets a burial. Doesn't matter finances, nothing. Everybody has that right. Same with bride and groom. Or bride and bride, or groom and groom. Everybody gets rejoiced with. It's this thing of equality and dignity that each person deserves in those moments. The giver and the receiver, it's about both. Certainly, right. So there's also an understanding that actually an opportunity to do chesed is greater for the one who gets to do it, because I get the opportunity to do this. What a gift for me. For anyone who hasn't, raise your hand if you've ever been to Shiva, or you've ever dropped a meal off for someone who just had a baby or a loss in their life, a really profound life-changing moment. And how did you feel when you did that, when you showed up for someone in a really special way? How did it feel when they said, thank you so much for being here, for bringing that to me? How did you feel inside? You can share an emotion, you can type it or say it wholly. Like a vessel, really. Beautiful. One, warm, yes, warm inside. Another part of chesed is that it's an act that we perform without the expectation of receiving something in return. It's an act we give of ourselves without the expectation that someone will pay us back or even do the same for us. Oftentimes, that's how it feels in society. I gave this person a gift, or I did them a favor, and now I expect it to come back to me. Not the case with chesed. It's something that we do selflessly that we give, not knowing what the outcome will be. Will it come back to me? Usually in a community, it just does, but we do it not so that we'll get something in return. It's also why we say God, God, we don't know why God created the world, but it was an act of chesed, of love, to give us the gift of life, not the expectation of receiving necessarily from us, but just to give us this gift. So that's how important chesed is. And I can tell that it's something that you're all very much already engaged in our community. So those are the three principles that Shimon HaTzadik says the world is founded on. I'd say they're pretty good. It changes the nature of the struggle I'm going through. Yes. How does it change it? Let's end on that beautiful note.
Well, I was talking about receiving times that I've received it. It just jolts you out of your regular expectation when you see people rising to the occasion. I've seen people mourn where nobody goes to their shiva, and I've seen people mourn where their shiva is full, and it changes everything about the experience for the mourner.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And it's almost hard to put into words how it changes everything, but the feeling of seeing people surround you, and even if, right, and for some of us, maybe it's been a smaller group, maybe it's been a larger group, but just seeing people show up in those moments. After, I'll just share, because it really changed it for me. After I had O's some 10 months ago, I assumed that I would just need to be in this bubble and not be around anyone. And I had certain friends who just showed up kind of just without my asking, started coming by with a hello or a lasagna or whatever it was. And I thought, oh, I won't want to see people. And then when they showed up, it was like the greatest gift, and it felt so good. And I felt so loved to see them. So it changed the whole experience for me, the isolation that comes in those moments when we really need acts of chesed. My hope is in your mitzvah project, as we'll think about this with you. You're probably thinking about issues in the world, hunger, poverty, the environment, all very important. Feel free also to think about acts of chesed that might feel smaller, but actually, Marcy, I don't know if you remember for Leo's bar mitzvah, but his mitzvah project had to do with attending Shiva and being a part of the chesed or the caring committee at Bethel. And that was really amazing. And I think it was a profound experience for him. He was baking for Shiva homes. That's what it was. He baked, and that was a mitzvah project. And so that too is a mitzvah project, is finding ways to show up in our community for people who need it.
I would also encourage all of you to really think deeply, because the way we've previously thought about mitzvah projects, volunteering for organizations is much more difficult to do in this current climate, in this current world. A lot of nonprofits are so grateful for participation, but they're limiting what that participation looks like. They're limiting what that in-person exposure looks like. And so part of our goal is to think creatively about the causes that you care about and the issues that you care about, to enact on your responsibility to do Gimilut Chasadim, these acts of kindness, and to think creatively about how to still make that happen. Now, I would say, especially now when we need so much more kindness in the world.
True. The Interfaith Food Pantry, I know, is still, of course, collecting food, and there are other nonprofits, but it's such a good point and one for us to keep in mind of those challenges. Yes, I love the idea of taking action, that we're doing something. I think it can be easy to feel overwhelmed by the problems of the world. And all of that, it just feels like too much. But the second we do something, even if it feels small, to offer to someone else, to care for them, to offer our ear, our time, our presence, however that looks, all of a sudden it makes sure we're not being swallowed up by sadness or by the isolation. We're saying no to that. It's an act of defiance, and it's putting goodness out into the world. And each of us has that power for each of these three things. I'd say for Torah, for the idea of study and maintaining an intellectual life and asking questions and always engaging in concepts of text in the weekly Torah portion, for example. Finding time for your own quiet inner life, closing your eyes and dreaming and thinking about God and what that means, thinking about nature and how small we feel. That is prayer. And then lastly, this idea of giving out into the world. So it's inner, it's outer, it's in our head, it's in our heart. Shimon HaTzadik, I think, captures all of that. Rabbi O, do you think we should do the second text? Maybe we should jump to...
Yeah, well, why don't we go over this text quickly? I just think it's important for us to not necessarily discuss, but keep this in mind. That is the most famous text, but there's a second text that we also find in Pirkei Avot and Mishnah Avot. That's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion of the three pillars, the three things that the world stands on. And we're just going to share that quickly for us to see. And in this case, can everybody see that? Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that the world actually stands on three different things. Al hadin ve'al ha'emet ve'al ha'shalom. That the world stands on justice, on truth, and on peace. On justice, on truth, and on peace. And now some would say, actually, that this is not so different, if we go back, that this is not different from what Simeon the Righteous is saying, Shimon HaTzadik, who says that the world stands on Torah, on Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. What is the connection? I want us to look at these two texts together. What's the connection between Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim, and justice, truth, and peace? Feel free to unmute if you want and share your thoughts.
Or, of course, in the chat, which I think is working well also.
No truth, no justice, no peace. Absolutely. The idea that if you look at it, that the world stands on three pillars, and you look at them truly as pillars, that we have this ball of gas and land and water known as earth standing on these three pillars. If you take away any of those pillars, like a game of Jenga, right? You pull away too many pieces and the tower eventually crumbles. You take away any of these three pillars and the world falls apart. That you can't have one without the other. We can't just settle for justice without truth and peace. We can't just settle for peace without truth and justice. We need all three of them. All three are there to bear the same load and the same weight, and all three are of equal importance. The same is true for Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. When we talk about our B'nai Mitzvah preparation process, one is not more important than the other. It may feel that way to some of us because when you're starting with your B'nai Mitzvah tutoring, the first thing you may be starting with your tutor is chanting Torah. And so that may be where we're spending the most amount of time. That's not to say that that is more important. That's just how the process goes. That is of equal importance to the other things. What else that we have? There are parallels. If you have confidence there is justice and truth in the world, it brings a sense of peace. Doing acts of Gemilut Chasadim brings peace to your hearts and to others. You can't have those three pillars if you don't think about things, spend time being productive, caring about others. No truth, no justice, no peace. That is K-N-O-W, not just N-O. I would say also that Deen, the idea of justice, is directly related to Torah, right? The idea that the whole essence of what Torah is, whether we look at it as learning or law, is to guide us in building a more just world and a more just society. That Torah is where we get the first laws, and we could wrestle with whether those laws are meaningful or not, whether they are archaic or still guide us in how we live our lives and how we build society. But that Torah is directly related to law. So even when we talk about law and justice, that is the pillar of Torah. When we talk about truth, throughout rabbinic tradition, they see God as truth. Not that God is fact, right? Part of believing in God, I've always been taught, is a constant wrestling with our belief in God. We are called B'nai Yisrael, the children of those who wrestle with God. Part of belief is to challenge our beliefs, to struggle with our beliefs, to be unsure of our beliefs. If we said, this is what God is, for sure, our beliefs are cemented in stone, then that's not really belief, that's sort of brainwashing. But our beliefs should change. One of my teachers, Rabbi Neil Gilman of blessed memory, said, when you are there and seeing a baby brought into this world, your relationship with God should be very different than it is when you are there burying a loved one. We need opportunities to cry with God and to curse at God. We need opportunities to say thank you and to say, why me? And those many truths, he suggests, is the relationship between God and us. And then finally, peace. Gemilut chasadim, this idea of acts of kindness, that kindness brings peace. Peace doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means when we talk about peace. Shalom is the same root of the word shalem, which means wholeness. That the idea in both cases of acts of kindness and in peace, it's the idea that the world is broken. It may have never been whole, but the world is broken or incomplete. In shalom, the root shalem means to complete, to finish. That part of bringing peace to the world is making the world whole again. Some of the comments in our chat function: learning prayer and acts of kindness leads to truth, justice, and peace. Parallel, but also a cause and effect. Torah, avodah, gemilut chasadim are acts that allow us to achieve the values of truth, justice, and peace for ourselves, our community, and the world. And if we are open to learning, then that simple act is allowing us to seek truth.
To add one layer, Deen, that word that we've been translating as justice, also means judgment, and is the word when we talk about a legal system. So when we have a good legal system, that leads, I would say, to truth in society, that judgments that are rendered are reflective of truth. And when we feel like truth is a value, and I'm thinking of your sermon over Yom Kippur, Rabbi O, but when truth is a pillar of a society, then I would say that leads to peace. Then there's greater peace and harmony that we might feel in a society when we know that truth is upheld as a value and that we have a correct and equal justice system. And so all of those things really lead to each other, just as I think you're saying about the first three concepts. They're meant to work together in a sort of stable way.
I want to put our B'nai Mitzvah on the spot now to answer the next question, because we started this conversation talking about responsibility. And so we have these different pillars. If we have a responsibility to the world to hold up this world, and what is our responsibility to Torah, to avodah, to gemilut chasadim? What is our responsibility to do truth, to be truthful, to make a more just society, and to build a more peaceful world? And how do we enact that? So I want to ask our B'nai Mitzvah to feel free to unmute yourself or to type in the chat function. What does that responsibility look like? How does that responsibility play out realistically in our lives? Because I think for a lot of us who may be of similar mindsets, we run the risk of living in bubbles where people around us may agree with us, and we want to associate with people who have similar truths to us. That makes us feel comfortable. That makes us feel safe. We don't want to live our lives in this sort of cognitive dissonance where everybody around us is butting heads with us and we are doing so with them. But as a result, if we all agree already, is it enough just to build shalom, to build peace within our community, or must we build peace in the whole world? There's a teaching that says without peace in our home, we cannot have peace in our city. Without peace in our city, we cannot have peace in the world. And without peace within ourselves, that inner peace, we cannot build peace in our homes. So I want to ask our B'nai Mitzvah, what does the responsibility look like in terms of these specific pillars? Feel free to unmute or enter in the chat function. Donating to organizations, supporting organizations to help people, right? Certainly the act of tzedakah, and there's a difference, I think, between tzedek and tzedakah. Both, I think, lead to the same goal, but in different ways. Tzedek really being justice and tzedakah being charity. Speaking up when you see injustice, right? Not being a bystander. Part of responsibility is that you can't step back. You have to step up. Learning to take responsibility and take action, that it's on you now, can't be on anybody else. It's easy for us to lean on our parents, and lest we think that when we become B'nai Mitzvah, we don't have to anymore and we could do whatever we want. We're still going to lean on our parents a lot. but part of it is about speaking up and stepping up, supporting people in desperate need. That so much of Torah talks about supporting the most vulnerable. One of my teachers, Rabbi Shai Helds, teaches that when we look at Torah, we should not look, and when we look at society, we should not look at how society has treated us, but we should judge society based on how it treats the most vulnerable. Because unless we include ourselves in the most vulnerable, which I would suggest that none of us are, no matter what's going on in our worlds and in our personal lives, we have so many blessings. Unless we judge specifically on how society treats the most vulnerable, we're missing Torah entirely. That part of responsibility is listening to others, speaking less and listening more. At home, showing more kindness to his brother, what Sam Gordon suggests, right? Showing more kindness to siblings, to family, that it starts at home. Like I said, if you don't have peace in your home, you can't have peace in this world. Taking care of our planet. That I feel so bad for all of you, for the world that we are leaving you. That the world that our parents have left us is a worse off world than it was, a planet, and we are leaving you a planet that is really in peril. And it is up to you to save it. We're going to do our best to help you, but part of taking responsibility is taking care of the planet, or there will be no planet for your children. Without truth, there is no justice. Without justice, there's no peace. Without peace, there are riots and chaos. From Ezra, very nice. From Tyler, making sure to always be kind. We get in this world, we see this in the political arena a lot, that when somebody, does a punch, whether that is a verbal punch or a physical punch, we want to respond in the same way to protect ourselves. It is much harder to be kind when somebody is being wicked than it is to respond to wickedness with more wickedness. There's this debate. We just read Parshat Noach, the story of Noah, this past Shabbat yesterday. And there's a debate when it says that Noah was a righteous person in his generation, what that exactly means. Does it mean that he was righteous and graded on a curve? Because everybody around him was wicked, but in another generation, he would not be that great? Or does it mean that he was even more righteous because it's so much harder to be righteous when everybody around you is wicked? It's so much harder to be kind when people are not being kind to you. My grandfather used to teach me to kill people with kindness, right? That you smile even bigger, that you say please and thank you even louder. Sam says being able to change lives, being aware of people's feelings, modeling behaviors so others see you and learn to do the same.
One note that I want to throw out there before I think we'll move to part 3, if it's okay, Rabbi O, is that I love these comments so much, and it sounds like you're all thinking deeply about what I can do and what I want to do in my own life. The rabbis asked the question, which is more important, Torah study or action? And we're focusing much more on action right now, which makes sense because there's so much we need to change in this world, and that's important. Which do you think is more important, Torah study or action? Gut reaction, what do you think the answer should be? Action. Action. That is exactly what we would think would be the winning opinion. And that is what one rabbi says, but the sages actually say, no, more important even than action, and not that action isn't important. Gemilut chasadim and acts of tzedek are really important, and maybe we're going to reject the rabbi's claim here, but they say that study is actually the most important. Why? Because it leads to action. Because when we study Torah and when we make well-informed choices about our behaviors, it comes from, study is also an act, true, but when we act in the world, it comes from a place of knowledge and of knowing what we're doing and of really thinking before we act. And so it's important that our actions be grounded from a place of Torah, from a place of Judaism and that motivation, which is what we're doing, which is exactly what you're doing in your Mitzvah project. You're studying Torah and you're acting. But I wanted to share that before we head into our third section.
So the last thing we want to do with the remaining time that we have this morning is, and we may not finish it, this is homework for you to take home and work on together. I'm going to share my screen again in a second. And what I'm also going to do is, let's see if I can pull this up, bear with me. I'm going to put a link in the chat function for you to look at. And I will make sure that, let me pull up this link. I will make sure that Karen also sends out this link to all of you to take a look at. Sorry, I had the wrong Dropbox link. What this is our invitation to all of you to build a family brit, a family covenant. When we talk about responsibility, it needs to begin in your home. It needs to begin with all of you. So what does it mean to be responsible as parents? I'm just putting that link in the chat function, and I'm going to share my screen again just to look at it. As parents, you may have an idea of what this world should look like now and what role your child plays in this world now that they are of bar bat mitzvah age. And as b'nai mitzvah, you may have an idea of what role you should play in your family now that you are of bar bat mitzvah age. And those ideas, those opinions almost never are the same, right? That they often are conflicting ideas. That this is a covenant, a brit between you and your parents, or parents between you and your child. And the first half is for parents to fill out themselves, that I or we as a parent or as parents of this child promise to do X, Y, and Z during this journey as they become b'nai mitzvah to help and support our children so that when they reach the age of b'nai mitzvah and they are transforming from a child to a young adult, I will help them to do this and expect that they will do this as a result. And then the second half is really something for the child to fill out. I promise to do A, B, and C. And during this journey, as I prepare to become b'nai mitzvah, upon reaching the age of b'nai mitzvah and transforming, sorry, there was a typo. It's still a legal document binding in the state of New Jersey, I promise. Transforming from a child to a young adult, understanding the responsibility I have to myself and to the world, I will now do this. This is really an opportunity for you as a family, could sign it as well, to talk about what your expectations are for each other. Because we go through this process thinking about becoming b'nai mitzvah means reading Torah, means having a service, it means being called to the Torah, it means teaching Torah. Becoming b'nai mitzvah is really a life stage. And I want you to think about what responsibilities do you expect your children to take on once they become b'nai mitzvah? And secondly, are soon to be b'nai mitzvah, what responsibilities do you want? Some of that may be more of a sense of independence, because with responsibility comes independence. With independence comes responsibility. What do you want to take on now that you are of b'nai mitzvah age? And this is a constant ongoing conversation for you to have together. There are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. There are only answers that are right for you and your family at this moment. So I want to invite you to take a moment to look at the documents, to talk it over together. And then we'll come back in a couple minutes if any of you feel comfortable sharing. If not, that's okay. This is not homework that you need to turn in. This is not for Rabbi Martyr to see. This is not for me to see if you don't want that. But this is, I hope, for you to print out and put on your refrigerator. This is for you to pass by regularly to be reminded of truly what b'nai mitzvah is, that it's not a single day. We talk about this all the time, that it is not a single service. There's not a single Shabbat or weekday. You don't have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. You become a bar mitzvah or become a bat mitzvah. It's about how you evolve, and thus how your relationship together as parent and child evolves as well. Take a couple minutes and look at the document. Feel free to discuss together, and then we'll come back together. And again, if you need, we'll make sure that Karen sends out the link again for anybody who needs it.
Okay, let's come back together. This was just meant to be the very beginning, and we do really hope that you'll work on this, that you'll carve out some time as a family to sit together and think about your evolving relationships, how home life is changing, and of all those realities. Were there anything that came up so far, though, whether it's a question you have as you started this, or maybe something you already thought that's a responsibility or an act of independence that's important to me, or a parent asserted something. Has anything come up for anyone yet that you'd like to share? You could type it, you could speak it. Also, Brit meant to be about relationship. So this is about working together. It's not one person or anyone dictating what it is. It's about mutuality and agreed upon ideas. So anyone want to share in just the last couple minutes that we have?
For example, the first mention we have of Brit is actually from this past Shabbat. The rainbow in the sky after the flood is God's covenants to humanity and promise to humanity. So it's about an ongoing commitment, understanding that it's not a one-time contract that you're making. It's understanding about your ongoing and evolving relationship as parent and child together.
Looked like the Zarels maybe had something to say.
To be kind, compassionate to others.
Nice. And to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah. So thinking about how we treat each other. Absolutely. In your family, in your home. Caleb, did anything come up for you?
Taking more responsibility around the house.
Around the house. Okay. Nice. Dishes, laundry, things like cooking, anything like that?
I see in the chat function, Claude wrote with regards to Ezra that we will strive to help him consider his actions, but also to consider the implications of inaction. That's an important role for parents. We talked about this at the very end of our first session, that there's traditionally a blessing, the Baruch Shepatarani blessing, that a parent would say when a child became B'nai Mitzvah. That's sort of like, all right, we're done with this child. You're on your own. Whatever you do or not, or choose to not do is totally on you. But it's our job as parents to continue to guide our child about the consequences of our actions and the consequences of our inaction.
And Risa, thank you. Talking about trust and respect for the new responsibility. Absolutely, that we have new maybe boundaries and respecting that. Great. thinking about truth in one's home, being honest, we could say also as an idea. How can you implement those pillars that we studied today in each text, whether truth, justice, peace? How do you create greater peace in the home? How do you make reading and study? Maybe that's something you are wanting to take on as a family or as individuals. Any of those 6 pillars we talked about, I hope they'll be guiding to you as you create your family brit. So thank you everyone so much for being here.
And again, that is not for you to turn back to us, but that is really for you to hold on to and to continuously refer back to during this journey leading up to your child becoming B'nai Mitzvah and onward, because it's really a pathway, a journey towards adulthood that they are on. As mentioned, we'll make sure that Karen sends out the link to this brit if you need it again. And our next B'nai Mitzvah family workshop is scheduled for November 15th. Does that sound right?
That's correct.
All right, November 15th at 9:30, and we look forward to seeing you all then. Again, if you have any specific questions about your own family's celebration of your child becoming B'nai Mitzvah based on our policies, that sort of thing, feel free to reach out to me or Rabbi Martyr directly. And as we begin to reach out to you as well, the closer it gets to talk that out. And just have a great day, stay healthy, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.